Good evening, everyone. It is November 9th, 2020. My name is Brian Evans. I'm the chairman of the Rubicon Masonic Society. And I don't know about you, but watching those pictures scroll across the screen before our meeting this evening sure does excite me for the opportunity when we can come together as men and Masons to enjoy each other's company, to discuss education, and to enjoy the conviviality that we have come so accustomed to take part in at the Rubicon Masonic Society. It's the pleasure and honor of the Rubicon Masonic Society to bring us together this evening, for which is part 5 of our 8-part virtual Masonic education series entitled Discovering Freemasonry. Each of these meetings are being recorded, and the setting is aimed to be very instructive with a progressive focus of a man's journey through Freemasonry. The Rubicon Masonic Society is an invitation-only private group of Master Mason Freemasons located in Lexington, Kentucky. The purpose of our group is to establish a deeper understanding and connection with Freemasonry, its traditions and practices, and further cementing the brotherhood of its members and guests through conviviality and unity outside of the lodge. I want to again thank you very much for your participation and attendance this evening. Throughout this series, you will meet many members within the Rubicon Masonic Society, as well as various special guests who will be appearing to discuss their personal experiences and knowledge about specific topics within our fraternity. My co-host for this series are Worshipful Brother Dr. John W. Bizak, past master and vice chairman of the Rubicon Masonic Society, as well as Worshipful Brother Dan Kimball, past master and honorary member of the Rubicon Masonic Society. Again, thank you for joining us this evening. Let us begin. Worshipful Brother Lyle Van Outer, chaplain of the Rubicon Masonic Society, will you please deliver the opening charge this evening?
Of course. Brothers, let us pray. Great architect of the universe, be present in the hearts and minds of all those present. Grant that what transpires during this education series be a light to the faithful among all faiths that honor God through service and devotion to the unity of all mankind and all existences. Invest all those who speak and ask questions with a pure understanding of your divine wisdom and the ability to communicate and realize the principles of our order. May we succeed by the honor of your holy name. Amen.
So mote it be. Thank you, Worshipful Brother. Brothers and friends, the agenda for this evening is as follows. In a moment, I will outline the purpose, the protocol, and the recommendations for these meetings. We will then proceed directly into part 5 of our 8-part series. Following the presentation, we will open up the meeting for all attendees for discussion and live question and answer. Following this discussion period, we will provide details on future education, as well as final comments in preparation to closing. Worshipful Brother Kimball, I know it is repetitive, but will you please read the disclaimer for our attendees?
I'll be happy to. There is a tremendous amount of misinformation about Freemasonry that currently exists in both virtual and non-virtual forms. Only factual information capable of being independently verified and consistent with the accepted academic research standards will be presented in this series. While the information presented during this series will be factual, any opinions expressed during the various presentations will be those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of any lodge or Grand Lodge or the Rubicon Masonic Society. All material contained in this presentation is suitable for Masons and non-Masons. No private information, including but not limited to passwords, signs, grips, or other elements of Masonic ceremonies will be disclosed during any part of the virtual series. By participating in this virtual meeting, you consent to the use of your name, likeness, and voice by the Rubicon Masonic Society. This entire presentation is the property of the Rubicon Masonic Society and may not be used without the written permission of the Rubicon Masonic Society.
Thank you very much, Worshipful Brother. Worshipful Brother Bizak, will you please deliver the purpose of our series?
The purpose of this educational series, brothers and friends, is to deliver a factual foundation overview of our honorable fraternity, beginning with a man's initial contact within the fraternity, his progression through the Masonic degrees, and the life path of a man as a Freemason in his pursuit to improve himself, not learning by learning and applying the lessons and the tools of the craft on a daily basis.
Thank you very much, Worshipful Brother. Brothers, the protocol for these meetings are as follows. Again, these are not tiled meetings. Masons as well as non-Masons are welcome to attend and participate, and we appreciate your attendance. Please be mindful that anything discussed this evening will be suitable for all degrees as well as non-Masons. Gentlemanly manners should be expected and delivered at all times. No alcohol, no smoking, no food or foul language will be permitted. There will also be zero discussion of politics and religion at any time. Attendees may be removed if not following protocol. In an effort to best assure that this virtual meeting is as enjoyable as possible, we respectfully recommend and request the following. We recommend that your attire for each meeting is coat and tie. Please type your name and the lodge number you are from under your picture or video to identify yourselves to others. If you are not a member of our fraternity, please simply type guest next to your name. Please be patient should any technical difficulties occur. Please enable your video camera so other attendees can see you. Please reduce any background noise and keep your microphone muted when not speaking. Please turn off all other computer programs to eliminate outside distractions when possible. Brothers, the title of our 8-part Masonic education series, Discovering Freemasonry. Brothers within the Rubicon Masonic Society have worked very diligently in order to provide you and the outside world with a factual overview and introduction to the philosophies and principles of Freemasonry. I want to reiterate again that this is not a program to detract in any way from the initiatory experience, nor to reveal passwords, grips, steps, or any parts of the Masonic ritual that is considered sacred or private. Upon our studies and surveys in and outside of Rubicon, we have consistently learned that new and even veteran Masons were never provided an explanation of the fundamentals that can be delivered in a basic overview such as this, hence the birth of this series. As you can see, we have many topics and episodes to go through, and we have already gone through 4. Today we are on the 5th episode, which is the Master Mason degree. Please understand that in the period of time allotted within these episodes, it will be impossible for us to conduct anything other than an overview of each topic. We encourage you to remember and not to assume that all men enrolled in this series are at the same level of Masonic instruction, and some may not be Masons at all, as I've said. While some participants will undoubtedly desire a more in-depth discussion, others will be encountering some or all of this information for the first time. Those who desire more information to what is presented within this series may be directed to specific books, papers, and websites that will assist in the pursuit of quality academic and Masonic knowledge. Tonight, I'm excited to announce that we will be discussing the Master Mason degree. We have broken this overview down into 4 sections. First, Worshipful Brother Cameron Poe will start and provide an introduction on the Master Mason degree, with specific discussion topics on the anomalies and symbols of the degree. Second, Worshipful Brother Eddie Hazlett will cover the common misconceptions of the Master Mason degree. Third, Worshipful Brother Chris Lewis will discuss the jurisdictional differences of this degree within our fraternity. And finally, our special guest, Worshipful Brother Rich Hansen, will discuss the spirituality of the Master Mason degree. Worshipful Brother Cameron Poe, charter member of the Rubicon Masonic Society and past chairman, I welcome you this evening, and sir, the floor is yours to kick it off for our guests.
Thank you, Worshipful. Can everyone hear me okay? Let's try that first.
Yes.
As long as no one complains, I'm going to keep going. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I think it's clearly more important to point out that, granted, in the period of time that we have, discussing a Master Mason degree is almost impossible, but it's not quite impossible. And I'd like to encourage you to stick with me on this, because what I'd like to do is present you with some topic items, and I believe Brother Hazlett and Brother Lewis and Brother Hansen are going to follow me in presenting some topic items for us to discuss. I think we all get more out of these meetings when we discuss things than just listening to someone speak. So keep that in mind. We've already heard the basics of the Entered Apprentice degree and the Fellowcraft degree in this series. Both of each mentioned the tools that we are given in each of those degrees respectively. And we, as Master Masons, we know what those tools are, but we may not have always been provided with the complete explanation or education on those particular tools. And I would like to mention a few of them this evening really quickly, but also one really important one that I think has been neglected for a long period of time, and I have no data whatsoever to prove that, but I get the feeling that we have not taught on this particular tool for many, many years, and that is the trestle board or the tracing board in all 3 degrees. The symbols that are mentioned in the Entered Apprentice degree and the Fellowcraft degree and the Master Mason degree were all beautifully illustrated, and the most famous one I can think of was by the Pettibone brothers when they began printing them in the late 19th century, around 1860. Most lodges that I've been in Kentucky will have 1 or 2 versions of this. Some actually pulled down from a rack, some are framed beautifully, some are just tacked to the wall, quite frankly. Some are incredibly old, some are very well preserved. Some that are well preserved, I will say that I mentioned I was at a lodge in Kentucky recently, and I mentioned how beautiful their trestle boards were, and it was mainly because they'd never been used. And I thought that was kind of a sad tragedy, but it was kind of funny at the same time. So the trestle board itself is mentioned twice in the Pettibone trestle board I'm speaking of is on the slide now. The trestle board is mentioned twice in the rituals of all 3 degrees. In the Entered Apprentice degree, it is listed as one of the movable jewels, along with the rough ashlar and the perfect ashlar. In the Entered Apprentice degree, the trestle board emblematically teaches us how we are to erect our spiritual building. We discussed this 2 series ago. In the Entered Apprentice degree episode, we talked about building that foundation, about what you bring into the fraternity when you become an Entered Apprentice Mason. In accordance with the designs laid down by the great architect of the universe in the great book of nature and revelation, which would be your spiritual book of choice, is our spiritual, moral, and Masonic trestle board. Everything we need to know is contained within that book. The trestle board is then a symbol of the natural and moral law. As we move into the Fellowcraft degree, as we discussed last time, this degree encourages us to expand our knowledge, to build upon that base, specifically with the 7 liberal arts and sciences: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And you can literally devote entire education series on each of those. And that's kind of what my point is this evening, is that there are so many symbols in Masonry that we just simply don't teach anymore. Many times it's left up to the individual. One of the biggest tragedies, in my opinion, especially in the Grand Jurisdiction of Kentucky, is that when you're raised a Master Mason, they basically slap you on the back and congratulate you. And that's where your learning stops. And that's a real tragedy. It's a disservice to the fraternity itself. But that's where we are, and I understand that, and I'm trying to improve that by sharing all of this information with you all tonight. There are 33 symbols on the Pettibone trestle board for the Master Mason degree: pot of incense, a beehive, a book of constitutions. Now I want to go back one symbol there, the beehive in particular. Here's a really good example. 2018 in Kentucky, the Grand Master Tim Sanders decided he wanted to have a program where he would have a traveling beehive. So he actually had a beehive constructed of wood, and it was shellacked. It was really pretty. They put it in a plexiglass case, and it was a traveling beehive. It went from lodge to lodge to lodge. Brothers would show up, and if you had enough brothers there, you would claim the beehive and take it back to your lodge. And it encouraged fellowship and travel among all the lodges in the state. It actually crisscrossed the state several times. One of the things we realized while this beehive was traveling around, that no one knew what the beehive was. Oftentimes they would ask what it meant. Even though a beehive is on the Pettibone chart on the wall in the lodge where they are standing, they often asked, why is there a beehive here? And that was very telling to me, and I kind of got on this hitch of we've got to start teaching these symbols better. One of the other favorite ones I have is the 47th proposition of Euclid. It's that little checkerboard square in the bottom corner. Everyone loves to look at it. No one knows what it means. It's the Pythagorean theorem. It's not a Masonic, originally a Masonic symbol by any means. It just comes from Pythagoras. It's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Look it up. You could spend all day reading about what it means and what it does. But I will also encourage you to discover what it means Masonically as opposed to what it means to Pythagoras. These are the Master Mason degree tools that no one teaches anymore, and it's a real travesty. We are trying to, at least in my area, we're trying to encourage as much of this education as possible. All you brothers on here, I don't need to preach to you. The reason you're here is to further your Masonic journey, and I appreciate that. But I think we've really overlooked the most important thing about the Master Mason degree, and that is the symbolism behind it. You are not finished when you become a Master Mason by any means. We are Freemasons. We're free to choose what we like and what we don't like and what we want to do and what we don't want to do. I think we can all agree on that. Everything we need to navigate this earthly life is contained within two things: our book of faith and the lessons of Freemasonry practiced as intended. If we stick to those two things, we will probably be able to navigate pretty well. We can choose to be a Mason that just goes to meetings once or twice a month and has a meal and pays our dues, or we can choose to bring life into our lodges. Learn, read, and think, more especially think. Give your meetings purpose. Give brothers a reason to come, not because they have to, but because they want to. Open your minds to new ideas, listen to new perspectives, and challenge the status quo, whatever it may be. That's why I enjoy these meetings so much, is the discussion we have afterwards from the new perspectives from Masons from all over the world who are in here with us tonight. Freemasonry is a moral and progressive science. And if we don't progress in that science, we will become stagnant. Don't just be another Mason. Stand up, stand out, educate yourself. Use that education to enrich and empower your lodge. The Entered Apprentice degree gave you a foundation. Explore that foundation fully. The Fellowcraft degree encouraged you to literally study the liberal arts and sciences. By expanding our minds, increasing our knowledge, we can progress to the Master Mason degree. One thing I forgot to mention about Kentucky in particular: once you achieve the Master Mason degree, there is no proficiency required. That's it. Unless you want to be an officer in your lodge. If you want to be an officer in the lodge, you must have a Master Mason proficiency. But if you have no intention of ever becoming an officer, there's no reason for you to even learn a Master Mason proficiency. So in my opinion, that's another huge chunk that we're missing in our spiritual journey. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to fail, and don't give up. You know, I became the most annoying Freemason because I began asking my lodge, why haven't you taught me these symbols? Why haven't we gone over this? Why haven't we gone over that? I irritated a few guys, but that's okay. I got over it, and I'm still here. Freemasonry has given us the tools. We talked about tools in the Entered Apprentice degree. We talked about tools in the Fellowcraft degree, and the Master Mason degree has even more tools. Remember, all the tools of Masonry indiscriminately are provided for us. Everything we do, and I mean everything, has meaning behind it. Learn what that meaning is. Incorporate it into your daily lives. Talk about it in your meetings. Talk about it with other brothers. And don't be that Mason that only thinks about it once or twice a month. Now, without going into the explanation of all 33 symbols, I can guarantee you that most of the men on this call who are Master Masons have a symbol in mind that they enjoy a little bit more than the others. Mine, in fact, was the beehive. It's just ironic that the Grand Master picked that in 2018 to be his symbol. But mine goes a little bit further in that my mother used to own her own business, and it was actually a beeswax candle company called the Beehive. So I grew up around these things. They were all over the house all the time, and they were her symbol for her company. So With that, brothers, I hope I've at least encouraged you to think of a few things to bring up during discussion. That was my intent. And I will hand it off to Brother Worshipful Brian if you want to pass it on to Brother Hazlett. I believe he's got some misconceptions that we need to talk about as well.
Great. Thank you, Worship Brother Poe, for setting us off on a great start. Excellent discussions, and look forward to bringing you back during the Q&A period. Thank you, Worship Brother. Worship Brother Eddie Hazlett, member of the Rubicon Masonic Society. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Worshipful. It's an honor to be with you tonight. It's an honor to be part of this series, and I'm very happy to contribute just a small little bit of my goals with some of this. The things I'll be speaking of this evening are, as Cameron mentioned, Worship Brother Cameron mentioned, are coming from the Grand Lodge of Kentucky and some experiences that we've had there. Some of the misconceptions that we see in the Master Mason degree, I'm sure come from the simple fact of lack of education after a gentleman's raising to the Sublime degree. Without having the proficiency required, rather than just a proficiency required to sit as a warden in a lodge in Kentucky, I'm sure that that's where a lot of these misconceptions come from, and the lack of asking. A few things that I believe we can all agree on, that out of all the things the Master Mason degree does represent, would be old age, wisdom, and the Hermetic legend. It is the newest of the 3 degrees in Freemasonry, which a lot of people don't know, especially young Masons. We know there's written records from operative lodges in Scotland from as early as 1598, possibly working lodges, without written records dating back to 1481. Many Masonic scholars agree that the 3rd, or the Master Mason's degree, was invented in London, England, during early part of the 1720s to 1730s. In Anderson's Constitution of 1723, we find references as to how the workings of the lodges are to take place. On page 61 and several articles, we see apprentices must be admitted masters and fellow crafts only, end quote. One of the biggest things that I really truly enjoyed was traveling to some lodges as a district deputy this year and as a member of the education committee in the previous years, and speaking or listening as to some of the misconceptions and the age of the Master Mason degree that some of our Masons in Kentucky really believed were to be factual. The second thing that I found that's the largest misconception here in Kentucky is that we didn't always conduct our business in the Master Mason degree. Our lodges here in the Grand Jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Kentucky Free and Accepted Masons were opening in the entered apprentice as late as 1870. I traveled to Phelps Lodge's 150th anniversary, Lodge number 482 in Kentucky last year, and I was honored to be there. And while I was there, the gentleman was reading the minutes, the original minutes from 1870, in front of a large crowd. The Grand Master of Kentucky, the Grand Line, was there. And they discovered very quickly that all of their business was conducted in the entered apprentice degree. That it did roll some eyes, but it's something that several of us that have dug into and read noticed and knew to be true. Here in the United States, particularly the Grand Lodge of Kentucky Free and Accepted Masons, the negative impact of the anti-Masonic movement upon the craft led to a convention held in Baltimore in 1843, which in turn set into motion the actions that changed the degree in which subordinate lodges here in Kentucky conducted their business. But it did not affect us immediately. It took many years to spread across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I have no validated reason for that other than the fact that at the time Kentucky was still a frontier. And the third most strange misconception that we stumbled onto is respect and decorum should never cease in the Master Mason degree. In the 4 approved ritual guidebooks from the Grand Lodge of Kentucky Free and Accepted Mason, respect and decorum is ordered across the board. When it comes to treatment of a candidate being prepared in any of the 3 degrees in Freemasonry, our rituals are very clear on this subject. The master of the ceremonies instructs the stewards, as well as the wardens and the senior deacon, to sternly, prior to retiring to the preparation room, to treat a candidate with respect and decorum. From this stern recommendation has spawned in our jurisdiction, as well as others I fear, and can presume, atrocious practices, side degrees, and ridiculous names and practices unbecoming of a Mason of any degree. The fourth misconception that I stumbled onto was the timeline for receiving the sublime degree of a Master Mason. Under the Grand Lodge of Kentucky Free and Accepted Mason, there must be 28 lunar days pass before a candidate of any degree can return a proficiency in the preceding degree and advance to the higher degree. This, in my opinion, is a very antiquated timeline. This could be a possible remnant of a time when the world in which we live spun at a much slower rate due to technology. One lodge in which I belong requires a staunch education regimen that will require the candidate to take at least a year from his first step into the craft before reaching the Master Mason degree. In closing on some of these misconceptions, brothers, all grand jurisdictions are different. And with that said, there may be other grand jurisdictions that have seen other misconceptions for sure. These are just but a few that myself and some of my contemporary brothers have discussed from time to time over a good drink and a moment of fellowship. I thank you this evening, Worshipful, for the opportunity to be part of this series, and I wish everyone well.
Thank you, Worshipful Brother. Great to see you. And now, Worshipful Brother Chris Lewis, Rubicon Masonic Society. Brother, the floor is yours.
Make sure I've unmuted myself there. That's been a problem with Zoom calls for me a few times. Hello, brothers, and good evening. My part today is to kind of address jurisdictional differences and differences within jurisdictions. And when I say that, it's not to address particulars, although I do have a few examples, but to talk about how they exist, that they exist, and how we as Master Masons should probably view and possibly even embrace them. Throughout the world and even within individual grand jurisdictions, there can be variances among the various degrees, and the Master Mason's degree is no exception. Whether it's in the form and wording of the ritual, the due guards and penal signs given, or in the tools which are emphasized, or even utilized in the Master Mason's degree, we do see differences from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And what is considered right or accepted within the degree can differ in small and even large ways. What's considered proper in a lodge in Ohio may seem completely foreign to a Master Mason in India. And a Master Mason in India may feel completely put off by what is done in a Master Mason's degree, say in California. Although in almost all those circumstances, there is some unifying piece of ritual, tool, or something that is still recognizable to that brother. Even in Kentucky, a jurisdiction where there's no unified ritual, and indeed we have 4 recognized ritual books, it's not even uncommon on a regular basis to find that what's considered proper or what's recognizable varies from lodge to lodge within this one grand jurisdiction. That being said, one thing to remember is that even the due guards and penal signs of many, let's say, European jurisdictions seem odd and even a little out of place to a Kentucky lodge, just as the simplicity of the due guards and penal signs used by a Kentucky lodge may seem to our European brothers. And I say that with some personal insight. Very early in my Masonic career, we were graced with a visit from a brother from Switzerland in our lodge in Lexington number 1. And I think it's safe to say that most people there were somewhat astonished by the complexity and formality of the due guards and penal signs that this brother displayed as he entered our lodge. They were foreign to us. And yet, despite the differences and the complexity, there were still basic core signs and symbols within his due guard and penal sign that were recognizable to us, to the point that we could recognize him as a brother Mason. Regardless of the degree, it's important for all of us, more especially Master Masons, I think, to recognize not only that these differences exist, but even to embrace them and learn from them, so long as they don't stray so far from Masonic teachings that they become unmasonic. I think it's important for us to remember that no one grand jurisdiction or one lodge holds a corner on what is right within ritual work or Freemasonry. One great example, I believe, is the difference in the working tools between the Master Mason's degree in the Grand Lodge of England and in most lodges in the United States, and certainly those here in Grand Jurisdiction of Kentucky. Without going into the symbolism or the meaning behind those tools, a simple Google search reveals that while in the United States and in Kentucky, the Master Mason's working tools are made up of all tools of Freemasonry generally, but more especially the trowel. Many Kentucky Masons, I imagine, would be surprised to learn that the working tools of a Master Mason in the Grand Lodge of England are made up of the skirt, the pencil, and the compass. And the trowel is generally not mentioned. And I'll have to confess myself that when I ran across this many years ago, I immediately had to take to Google to figure out what a skirt is. It's a measuring tool that's meant to help determine the straightness of walls and foundations. You can think of it as what some people might call a ley line. What was also interesting to me is that most standard sets of working tools in Kentucky lodges don't even contain the skirt or the pencil. It's not generally in Kentucky even seen as being one of those general working tools that we recognize. And that's a little surprising, given that most lodges would trace their lineage back to the Grand Lodge of England in the United States. Some of that may be from what Eddie alluded to in his presentation, the fact that the Master Mason's degree is the newest of the degrees. And the inception of that degree and the evolution of that degree in the Grand Lodge of England easily took place at a time when Masons in America already had a little bit of geographical separation from what was going on in England. How, when, and why the working tools diverged between the jurisdictions and what that may represent could easily be the subject, I believe, of its own educational presentation. But for our purposes tonight, I think it's enough to recognize that those differences and many others exist, and despite those divergences, they don't in any way diminish from the ritual, the meaning, or the validity of a Master Mason's degree in either jurisdiction. And neither jurisdiction has a degree that is any less instructive, inspiring, or right as we may view it. What I feel is and should be important for any Master Mason who considers himself a true traveling man is that these differences exist, and to embrace and learn from the subtle and sometimes not so subtle differences of Master Mason's degrees as they exist not only in other grand jurisdictions, but as they differ from lodge to lodge. And I think by doing this, Master Mason not only can broaden his education and understanding of the craft as it exists internationally, or even within his own jurisdiction and the subtle differences from lodge to lodge. But almost assuredly that Master Mason will broaden his own understanding of himself as he experiences and delves into what these differences are, why those differences are, and what they mean to the members of those lodges and those jurisdictions. That being said, I will hand it off to Brother Hanson.
Thank you, Worship Brother Lewis. Excellent discussion topics. Indeed. Look forward to discussing that later. And finally, our special guest this evening is Worshipful Brother Rich Hanson. And before you begin, brother, I would like to have our very own Worshipful Brother Bizak offer an introduction to you as our special guest.
Certainly. Worshipful Brother Richard Hanson is past master of Jake Rice Lodge 606 here in Kentucky. He is currently the Lodge Education Officer of Thomas DeVinny and Marion Hale Lodges. In addition, he serves as Senior Steward at Ted Adams Lodge of Research. And Rich was appointed to serve on the Grand Lodge Committee on Education in 2020. And today he serves as Chairman of the Grand Lodge Committee Masonry Matters. He's a member of the York and the Scottish Rite, as well as the Masonic Society. Now, those of us who are familiar with and know Rich and his work and his strong commitment to our fraternity can easily recognize that Freemasonry is not something that just fits into his life well, but Rich, as a good man, fits seamlessly into Freemasonry. Brother Rich, the floor is yours, brother.
Good evening, brethren. I'd like to start by first thanking the Rubicon Society for allowing me to speak to you this evening. And I thank you for the wonderful introduction, Brother John Bizak. You've always been a true mentor to me. You and Dan Kimball have absolutely been an honor to get to know and to hang out with, and it's been a pleasure. It's always an honor to study our craft with like-minded brethren. And as you're aware, we're here this evening to expound a little bit on the Master Mason's degree. And we've had a lot of excellent content so far. It's really hard to follow Brother Poe and Hazlett, and Lewis. I commend you on the job that you did. It was excellent, excellent stuff. The sublime degree of a Master Mason and the legend it contains is one of the most profound rituals and allegories that we've found within our craft to date. It has been stated that it is the pinnacle of the Blue Lodge degrees. It seems to have been divinely inspired with characters, words, deep meaning, symbolism, and it continues to produce a labyrinth of exploration and many veils to walk through for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And yes, gentlemen, you heard me correctly. I said I feel like it's been divinely inspired. As most of us know, the third degree was not always within our ritual system, and several different legends have been used throughout the Masonic history. But that takes nothing away from its importance and timely creation. Remember, brethren, our time is not his time. I've personally accepted that the grand architect of the universe has placed himself exactly where he wants within our fraternity and has inspired great men to produce such works as our rituals at the exact time they were needed. This would be no different than Brother John Bizak publishing one of his great books with a timely message, or one of the outstanding papers that the Rubicon Society has brought forth to teach its members concerning the craft. Timing is everything, and the inspiration only comes from within. How else can we explain the long-lasting effects that the Masonic ritual has had on each of us? These rituals, especially the Master Mason degree, has changed my life, and I'm sure the degrees and the rituals have changed yours, those who have experienced them. The Master Mason degree in itself has the ability to produce one of the most profound effects on a candidate if the degree is understood and performed correctly. Our sublime degree, for the third and final time, presents the candidate to the altar of Masonry. And I know we can't go too deep tonight. I wish we could. There's a lot to be learned, but most of you watching this probably already know. So that's a special event. But I was deemed tonight to talk a little bit about the philosophy, and I'm the spirituality guy. I love that. That's how I came up. So I always try to intertwine a little bit of that in my message. The number 3 has been defined in many ancient studies as being symbolic of the resurrection. And we can see the resurrection through many, many of our ancient texts and holy books. And I would dare say that all of you who've truly experienced this degree in all its majesty within his heart and mind can agree to that definition. As much as I love to study the historical and the practical side of this degree, which we have had great pleasure of listening to these gentlemen bring forth this evening, once again, fantastic work. I've always felt that I felt myself leaning more towards the philosophical and spiritual side of things and looking for that deeper meaning. I, like Cameron Poe, have always asked the question, why? Why do we learn this? Why do we do this? Why do we not learn this? Those are all pretty aggravating things to the person who doesn't know, but I think we deserve that. And that's kind of what we offer, or at least tell people we offer. So as Masons, we're taught, or should be taught, that there are many veils to walk through within our craft. So my primary focus here this evening is to encourage and challenge everyone to not forget within their own studies, to use our philosophical and spiritual lenses while dissecting this degree and the others. Walter Wilmshurst, I'm sure that's an author that everybody here is familiar with. If you're not, please read his work. It's fantastic. He leans heavily on the spiritual side of things. Produced a work, The Meaning of Masonry, which is, I talk about a lot in my speeches. I really enjoy his work. But he said, I sometimes fear that too conspicuous display of emblems and trappings of mortality in our lodges is apt to create the false impression that the death to which the third degree alludes is the mere physical change that awaits all men. But far deeper meaning is intended. The Mason who knows his science knows that the death of the body is only the natural transition, of which he need have no dread whatsoever. He states that all man fears is that when the time comes, he may not be free from those stains or falsehoods of dishonor, those imperfections of his own nature that may delay his after progress. He states that the death to which Masonry alludes is not the death of the body, but it is the death in life to man's own lower self, which St. Paul referred to when he protested, I die daily. And more than likely, that's what we're really trying to allude to when we state that Masonry takes good men and makes them better. Masonry is designed for the application and implementation of its tools to improve this nature and to keep us circumscribed within due bounds. And the third degree is no different. We are meant to realize with the Master Mason degree that death is not the end, but the entrance to a better life. When speaking about spiritual unconsciousness, Wilmshurst stated, the death and subsequent raising of the representative of the Grand Master is a very obvious representation of the requirement for our current way of life to die before it can be raised to a sublime level. Our selfish attitudes and materialistic life must be left behind before we can obtain mastership of a higher order of life and faculty. Only then does our darkness become visible. And at that point, we have developed the ability to see through the mysterious veil which the human eye of reason cannot penetrate. This is the true initiation of a Mason. This is when we understand the secrets and mysteries of the ancient Freemasonry. We are reminded that the spirit cannot be raised to the sublime state with only a physical or mental assistance. These prove a slip. Only by all three aspects, the body, the mind, the spirit, acting together and on the 5 points of fellowship can we be raised. Once again, my goal this evening is for us to never forget that there are many layers to building a temple. Not only physical or mental, but spiritual as well. And this concept is no more demonstrated than it is within the Master Mason's degree. Brothers, when building any type of structure, most people would state you start with a solid foundation. But I state you start with thoughts, ideas, desires, the blueprints within your own conscience. And you have to ask yourself, where do these come from? Intellect? Do we really feel like we're that smart? Or is it the divine spark within us that eludes and illuminates and enhances our vision and our dreams? We take the divine principles of intellectual wisdom and knowledge that has been bestowed upon us by our ancestors, our teachers, and our experience, and we apply that to the building, just as our ritual teaches. And all Masons should know what Masonry states about the building. I think Brother Poe alluded to this earlier. We are the building. We are the temple. We are designed to be the great men of society. The third degree teaches that we are to be the representation of our Grand Master by improving ourselves daily with the implementation of the tools and the teachings laid before us, bringing the lower nature of man to the higher nature of God, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And that, my brethren, is the most important aspect of the Master Mason degree to me. There are many valuable lessons to be learned within this degree: philosophical, esoteric, historic. I love them all. I've only scratched the surface here because that's all we could do this evening. I implore you, my brethren, never give up your studies. That's where true Masonry really lies. Worshipful Master, I once again thank you, and I thank the Rubicon Society for allowing me to speak to you this evening. It has been my honor.
Thank you very much, Worshipful Brother Hanson. And before you get too comfortable and turn off your microphone, I'd like to start and open up discussion with you, and also incorporate Worshipful Brother Eddie Hazlett in this conversation.
Okay.
I think from the purpose of misconceptions, I think there is a fair amount of misconception out there about people who are extremely unfamiliar with the fraternity, that often misconstrue spirituality within our fraternity with religion. Our fraternity is not a religion. However, you talk deeply about spirituality. Would you, and perhaps Worshipful Brother Eddie, dive into that topic a little bit, and the difference between the two, and why it is not a religion, but why it's spirituality it is so important?
Absolutely. Brother Eddie, who do you want to go first?
Well, I think I can just give a tidbit of a little role there that you I'm sure will elaborate on much better than I. But from my personal experience, I think one of the greatest teachings that I have found in text, in action, and in ritual is that I don't necessarily think that the idea of discussing politics in a lodge or religion was a censorship for men explaining differences in where they come from and practices in which they believe and faiths that they have. I think that it was literally intended for the trappings of society that divide countries, that overthrow civilizations, that lead to tyranny and fanaticism, never expands within the walls of a Masonic lodge. I believe that that spirituality and our faith is what drives us, and very well could be, as Worshipful Brother Rich said, the bedrock and foundation that we build our own temples with. But I believe that the old saying that in many teachings say that we are a brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God. And I believe that is a very open and empathetic and unified statement that we don't single out, but yet it allows our faith and spirituality to drive us and lead us to more knowledge. I hope that answered in some form or fashion that tidbit.
Yeah, I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that, Brother Eddie. It's pretty good, I think. You didn't leave me much to work with, did you? Worshipful Master, I would say that, I think I've told this story before, but I was always a very religious person. This is the Bible Belt in Eastern Kentucky, Kentucky in general. It's no secret. Most of us were brought up in a religious background. But sometimes that I found myself being really bound down by that. I found myself reading the King James Version of the Bible and almost feeling guilty when I read anything else. But I kept feeling that tugging at my heart to kind of expand. And that's kind of really what led me to the craft. Masonry was always intriguing to me. I didn't have any family members. I really didn't have a whole lot of friends. I just had a calling. I can't really explain it other than that, than to go to the door and knock. And I often tell in my stories that I didn't know anybody in the building. I really didn't know anybody. I had some friends who I later found to be brothers that were supposed to be there, but they did not show up. So I was kind of on that lone journey, but that's been my story my whole life. And I always felt that something was leading me and guiding me through that. Now, what I found was that a lot of people, they do get tore up about the religious aspect, and they think that, you know, there's only one religion and that's it. That's the way it's going to be. But when I broke out of my religious box and started going down the path of Masonry and getting introduced into hermetics, esoterics, philosophical studies, all kinds of different things that I had never even heard the words of. But what that did to me, and I think that's what our fellowcraft degree alludes to, is it took my mind and forced me to go into all these different studies like we're implored to do. I fear that many don't, but we're implored to do that. And what it allowed me to do was to find God in everything. And for me, that was just a super enlightening aspect, because like I've told you guys, I'm a why man. Why? But when you look at geometry, or when you look at literature or poetry, and you find these great men and these great women even that have produced these works, and all of a sudden you just happen to see glimmers and glimpses and of something higher, some kind of inspiration, and I call that God. And for me, that allowed me to understand that, you know, I don't have to be in a religious box. And spirituality, the word just spoke to me, because I find it honestly in every religion. And it doesn't matter to me what book is up on the altar for each individual candidate that comes through, because that is his personal journey. I've been taught through my religion to love. And I think that is the ultimate thing. And if I can love a man who is not of the same faith of me, and we can meet upon the level and love each other and find some common ground, then you know what? That's enough for me. It's not my duty to convince him to follow my God or your God. That's between him and his creator. And I have faith enough to know that if my creator can prick my heart and lead me in the direction I feel like I should go, then he is highly capable of pricking anybody else's heart. But I'm here to love you and be friends with you. And honestly, that's why I love the fraternity, and just be a brother. We can be anything in this world, but when we sit down in that lodge, we're brothers. And to me, that dispels all myths of certain religions or whatever. I like the spiritual aspect. So I hope that answered.
Actually, Worst Brother Hanson, can you repeat everything you just said? Because it was fantastic. You did an excellent job, and you gave me goosebumps. And I think it's important to, it was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Anybody at this time, you're more than welcome to chime in, engage in discussion, bring up topics for questions and answers. And while I'm waiting for anybody to feel comfortable to do so, there was a question that came in from Worst Brother Bizak, and if he'd like to answer that or ask that question, he's welcome to do so. But I'll go ahead and chime in if you want. Most people on this meeting have either participated as a Master Mason and also watched on the sidelines the Master Mason degree. And the question is, did anyone get more out of watching it than going through the actual ritual work, or vice versa? Worst Brother Bizak, was that the right question?
It was, brother, and the other part of the question is, if you've conferred a degree, the Master Mason's degree, did you get more out of that than watching it or going through it?
Good point. So that's an open question for anyone that might like to chime in.
I know these gentlemen aren't going to make me answer all the questions. Brother Poe, Brother Lewis, where you at?
No, we'll start calling on them. Don't worry.
I'd like to ask that question specifically of Chris Lewis.
Yeah, I'll hop in on that one. I will say for me personally, it's a different experience going through it and observing it. I know in my class, there were 3 of us that went through the Master Mason's degree on the same night. I went first. There is certainly an experience of walking through the ritual and being the focus of the ritual that's on one level. But because of the intensity of it, there's things you miss. So I know sitting down immediately afterwards, while that physical, visceral experience was still there, and then being able to observe the next two candidates come through it, really kind of solidified what I had been through and helped piece together, I guess, for me, what the others were doing. Coming back to the backside of that question, I think when you go through the process of learning the different parts of the ritual and learning it in detail so that you can give the degree, it's again another heightened level of learning, because it's more of a, rather than an experiential process, it's an academic process at that point. It's reading and rereading and studying and committing to memory. And I think anytime you go through that process of that in-depth memorization and repetition and, practice with the brothers on the team and working yourself through different portions of the ritual, whether you're, the master, or whether you're the guide, or whether you're the senior warden for a particular ritual, working yourself through each of those stations and memorizing and becoming part of someone else's experience brings a completely different level to it. I mean, I think all are equally valuable, to be honest. I think the experience of being the candidate yourself gives a heightened awareness. And I do think it's very valuable, and you almost feel sorry for the last guy in line, because he's not going to get that opportunity immediately while he's still at that heightened awareness to watch the ritual. And I was very grateful for that. So, I mean, that's my take on it.
I think I'm going to jump in here, Worshipful, if that's okay.
Please.
I have a little bit of a different perspective than most of the men that I've spoken with over the years, primarily because, and I can say this because none of them are around anymore, my Master Mason raising was actually done pretty poorly. And that really resonated with me because I had no idea that it was done poorly. But my father was in attendance, and my father told me that it was done very poorly. So that motivated me to find out, again, why, and also to promise myself that I would never let that happen to another man that came through at least as long as I was around. So I get much more out of ritual than I did out of my degree. I committed to myself to conferring degree work as much as close to perfect as I could possibly muster. So, my most intense feelings come from actually performing the ritual for someone else, because I want to ensure that, just like Brother Hanson referred to, it is a spiritual and moving experience. I made a presentation a year or two ago, and I mentioned something that happened to strike home with a lot of brothers in the room, and it was completely unintentional. But one of the things that I said was that we have, and I don't think I said it originally, I think I've probably read it somewhere. There are too many authors in this group for me to claim authorship of it. But we've made Freemasonry in North America, in particular, a transaction, when exactly it should be a transformation. We should be transforming people. If you're the same man you were when you knelt at the altar as when you rise as a Master Mason, then we've done something wrong. It should change you fundamentally. And I know that's a big ask in a lot of places, but that's my personal opinion. And that's why I've always felt that the ritual itself, for me, I've always gotten more from it, even watching it now. I don't perform it anymore. Luckily, we've got enough brothers in my lodge that I've handed that torch off, and it's fun to watch the other brothers perform it, because we're all a little bit different. No one does it exactly the same way. We all bring different levels of passion to it, but we're all passionate about it. And I always get more out of watching or performing ritual than I did actually going through it. So.
Yeah, great point. It's being a transformation versus a transaction. That's a really excellent way to think about it. Thank you for that comment. I see that Worship Brother John Cameron, you have your hand up. Feel free to offer your insight.
Thank you, Brother Evans. To follow on with Brother Poe's comments, it is transformational. The initiatic rituals that we employ should transform the candidate. Now, I'm not sure we do a very good job in preparing for that transformation to take place with the candidate. He is, in fact, blindfolded. The rituals, the initiatic experience is better enhanced, I guess, if we engage all of the senses. And with the candidate, he's blindfolded. He has his hearing and possibly his sense of balance, but those are the only senses that he really is engaged with. There is no visual, there's no sense of smell employed, and he's denied the visual performance of the actors, fully dressed and staged. So it's rituals, transformational rituals have been employed by religion for centuries and centuries and centuries, and they have gotten better. And these the performative acts follow a pattern, and I believe from a Freemasonry perspective, we've interrupted the pattern, and that the candidate is not really prepared. The transformation of the third degree takes place when you first see it. You're on the sidelines, and your visual is engaged, and you can put into perspective then the things that you've heard said and done in the lodge, because they're totally out of context as they're being acted upon you. So the experiential knowledge that's being passed along to us by the rituals are not very well explained to the candidate, either post degree. So my greatest transformational occurrences happened actually when I was delivering, when I was actually participating in the degree, not necessarily preparing for the performance, but actually performing the degree, where I was able to put myself into the character that I was portraying and was able to experience that and then communicate that experience. I was really engaged as an actor. So I concluded that actors in live theater actually enjoy the performance more than the people who pay to watch it. They truly can understand the character that they're portraying versus those who are able to watch it. So those are just some of my comments. My greatest experience is when I participate in the delivery, regardless of the role that I play. But I'm able to go back to that era, whether I'm the seafaring man or whatever character I portray. I'm able to get into character as all my other performers within the degrees. So that's my 2 cents. It's a wonderful thinking, and I'm not sure how we can prepare our candidates for the experience that is going to take place and that is taking place around them, other than we all universally agree, I believe, that we really get the most out of it watching it and then participating in it. So our candidate, I'm not sure what benefit they derive other than they're now whatever degree we've initiated them through. Thank you, Brother Evans, for the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. In fact, I would echo that and agree 110% that there is something extremely special and gratifying delivering and conferring a degree or participating in ritual work. It is just, it's an experience, and it's the preparation involved and the anxiety ahead of time and the relief and enjoyment after the fact. It's really special. It's extremely special. And anyone that maybe has not given or conferred any degrees, I would challenge you to do that. It's a different level of involvement with the degree. Worship Brother Jerry Smith, I know you had a couple comments. Feel free to chime in.
Thank you, Worshipful Brian. On the subject of when does the transformation happen and how does it happen? The transformation doesn't happen from either experiencing it or watching it or conferring it. It happens from the repetition of having your mental, emotional, and spiritual attention paid on the ritual. The ritual is so dense, it's so subtle, you can't ever get all of it all the time. But as it goes again and again and again, this isn't like a movie. Somebody says, you want to go to this movie? No, I've already seen it. That never happens with the ritual if you're experiencing it the way that it can be experienced. The worst performance has something in it if you're paying attention. That part of it may not be apparent to everybody else. It may be just your reaction to some singular thing even. And the best performance doesn't have it all. It's an accumulation. That's the way ritual is designed. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's my opinion, of course. I'm going to come across here as doctrinaire, but the repetition and the degree to which you can really commit your attention to it is that you have to do that again and again for it to totally soak in. That's my thought for this particular discussion.
I think it's a great point, Worship Brother. And so easy we forget what our obligations are and our commitments to each other. And it's an excellent time to repeat those privately to ourselves. And I believe that's where you were going. And I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, I always make it a point when I'm watching any of the 3 degrees that when the candidate is being given their obligation to just kind of like put myself in that candidate's place, and you're renewing your obligation. And some of the best insights I've had in degrees many years after I had my own obligation are during that obligation of some other candidate, especially if it's a candidate that I have really gotten to know during the process of either them approaching the lodge or going through the degrees or going through the classwork or any of that sort of thing.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you. Worship Brother Hanson, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there, and Jerry's right. Brother Jerry's correct. It is definitely culmination. When you have that initiation, we're supposed to have the enlightenment, the eye-opening experience. Now, I think once you go through that, I'm with Brother Jerry, you can't get it all. It's too much. It's overwhelming. It overwhelms all the senses if it's performed correctly. And that's what it's supposed to me, that's what it's designed to do. It brings us questions. And the key component to that I think we're missing in the craft today in a lot of places is at that point, we kind of allude back to what Brother Lewis said. It's very academic. We have to put the education in with that. Because if we can educate and understand that understanding these degrees is really a lifelong journey. The very moment that I think I have the Master Mason degree figured out, if I do contemplation and I meditate on it and I talk to brothers like tonight, what I find out is there's those veils that we always talk about. Those veils are like, they're pulled aside, and we have that divine thought that a brother just passed us saying, man, I never thought of that. You know, and saying, how does that apply? So that actual degree to me is the lifelong journey. Just the moment that I think I have it figured out should be a red flag enough to know that I don't have it figured out. I need to go back and always apply and always study. And just like Brother Lewis said, it's the academic, it's the layers. And then back to Brother Poe, it's transformative. And when you transform something, you go through a process. And if you study alchemy at all, there's always that alchemical process. You don't pour one ingredient in it and get everything, poof, magic happens. It's a mixture, and it's a lifelong implementation and process. And then the veils start to lift. It's super transformative. So, thank you.
Yeah, great point. Worship Brother Poe?
Yes, sir. As I've sat here and contemplated, I believe that transformation transaction idea I first gleaned from Worshipful Brother Tom Jackson about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer. But I wanted to reiterate that it wasn't my idea because he is on the call tonight, and I'm thrilled to see him. But I think that transaction transformation theory came from a speech that I heard him make at some point. So I just wanted to point that out. I didn't want to sit here and smile while everyone else was talking about it. So thank you.
Well, Right Worship Brother Tom Jackson, you've been called out, sir. In a good way, in a very good way. Would you like to comment? We'd love to hear your insight.
Well, it's again my real privilege to be able to sit and listen to the presenters tonight. It's almost like each one is taking a different road to the same end, but the end is what is there for all of us. Brother Poe was singing a song that I've been singing for a good many years. But you know, the one thing I've learned, in the 58 years that I've been in Freemasonry, and I've presided over 18 Masonic bodies on different levels, the one thing I've learned in those 18 bodies and in those 58 years is just how little I know. And what Cameron said tonight, in the lack of education, is something that, a point that I've been emphasizing for a good many years now. There is so much knowledge available in Freemasonry. It's just not possible for any one individual to be able to comprehend it all. But it's a journey through learning. And certainly the presenters tonight regarding the teachings of the third degree has dwelt a great deal on that whole subject. It is a transformation. But you know, I think it probably the greatest advantage that I get out of receiving the degrees, and I was fortunate in that when I received all 3 of my degrees, I had good presenters conferring the degrees. And in each case, I came out truly amazed and impressed in the information that was there. But I also learned when I began conferring the degrees that this is when you really learn the true meaning of the message that they're trying to convey. I certainly thank the presenters tonight. I thought you did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship Brother Jackson. Appreciate your insight.
Worshipful Master, can I ask a question? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, please, go ahead.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
I would like to ask Brother Poe, because I get hung up on some of this too, and I'm really curious of his answer. Where would you be if they would have performed a perfect degree on you?
That's a really good question. I think in my heart, I would be in the same place. I think, you know, it's hard to determine what a perfect degree would have brought me out of. Now, I do think that the experience that I have lit a fire in me, and it may, you know, with a perfect degree, maybe I would not have been as motivated. I would probably have been motivated to equal that experience. Whereas what I did get was disappointing ultimately. And I don't hold, it's not that, I don't want to disparage what I went through. Let me say that right up front. But it could have been so much better. And that's what I realized later on. And that's what I aspired to, commit to myself, that we were not going to allow that to happen again as long as I could perform degree work. And I'd like to think that I would be the same person. I'd still be a Mason. I'd still be active. I would still be doing these types of things. But one thing I do think that experience gave me was the fire and the motivation to improve. And as I've grown over the years, it's actually increased. And this is a perfect example of it. If you had told me 5 or 6 years ago that I'd be sitting here with all of you tonight, I probably would have just smiled and said, aha, really? I don't know, but here we are. So, and that excites me for the future. So I don't know if I answered your question directly, but I think I'd be in the same place. But I'd like to think that it actually created a motivation in me that normally would not have been there.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was coming from, that because I too didn't experience the most fantastic evening, but I've often learned through a lot of our problems, our troubles and toils grows a fire, and we ask, why, and we perform better, and we make oaths to ourselves, and it's kind of the drive that drives us. Now, of course, I'm like you. I'm sure there's no perfect degree, but just using it as an example, I would have liked to have seen much better, but I don't know where I would have been if things haven't. I guess where I lean on that is, I try to understand that things happen for a reason. Things come into our lives for a reason. People come into our lives for a reason. And I try to, because I get really hung up on poor ritual, and I'm no ritualist. I get hung up on that, and I think we can do a much better job, especially when you see the guys that blow it out of the water. It's easy to get hung up on the negative, but I'm in the process myself of trying to transform my mind from a negative thought pattern, narrative type of state, to trying to see the beauty in everything. And I think it was probably the beauty of not having a good one that has lit the fire for the men like yourself to really put forth the effort and just stand up and say, that's not going to happen on my watch. So I commend you for that. It was a good answer.
For those guests that are watching and hearing a lot of this discussion about ritual and maybe still vaguely familiar with Freemasonry, I would encourage you to understand and see the fact that Freemasonry is different with, as Brother Lewis said, across different jurisdictions. It's perhaps taken more seriously in some lodges than others, and some ritualists, and etc. So my question actually is for the panel. I know it's probably difficult to completely define, but if you could define this perfect ritual, the features perhaps as well as the benefits, without giving any specifics away, what would you say? And maybe I'll kick it off by just starting and saying, obviously know your lines, know what you're supposed to say without assistance if possible. And then that would be a feature, and maybe a benefit would be driving home and enticing the feeling that either you or the audience or the participant or the candidate feels from what you're doing. So what is the perfect ritual in your all's mind?
I think you answered your own question there.
Well, I was trying to throw some softballs to get it going.
Yeah, I that's actually not as soft as you think, because ritual is different for everyone.
Sure.
Is there a perfect ritual? Gosh, I don't know. It all depends on, in my opinion, and this is again strictly my opinion. I think being aware of if you're a part of a ritual team, I think it's essential for the team itself to be aware of what everyone's role is and what you're actually trying to portray. You're not simply talking to a guy for 20 or 30 minutes. He really needs to listen and understand what you're saying. And that goes back to the education part of it, is follow up to a ritual. If you don't understand what you went through in the degree, then it's all moot and it means nothing. It just means that you've got the degree. So I don't know if there is a perfect ritual, but I do think that the passion and the commitment that it takes to perform quality ritual is evidence, as Brother Hanson mentioned. You can tell when the guys who have really worked at it perform it. And that's not a slight to the other guys who might have other life obligations, who maybe not have the time to put in, but you can really tell when someone has committed themselves to performing a quality ritual. And I think that's more important than a perfect ritual.
Anything else from the panel on that?
Well, I would also say that in my experience, I think if we're blessed, if a candidate is blessed to have a gentleman, a brother conferring his ritual, he will almost absorb the compassion that gentleman confers that degree with. And you also see that on the other side. If, you know, a team, like Cameron said, isn't prepared, if there's not necessarily a schedule as to when a lodge is conferring ritual, rather than you're hurrying and getting together basically because a candidate has come to the door that is ready to turn his proficiency, and you feel like that he needs to be advanced so fast that you don't take the time to deliver something quality that man will carry with him the rest of his life, as well as see the compassion that the degree team is conferring to him. One of the most emotional things I've ever experienced in this craft was approximately about 10 years ago. A neighbor in my community had a rummage sale, a garage sale, and there on the table was her father's past master's Bible from his funeral. And after a brief discussion of explaining to her in so many words why it was inappropriate for her to sell this, I gained possession of it, took it home, and had it laying in my library for about 7 years. And that gentleman and that brother who had passed, his grandson petitioned our lodge. And he was a senior history student at Morehead State University. And I gained as much information about him as I could, and as much information as I could about our fallen brother and his grandfather. So the evening I raised him, and I had the pleasure of raising him to the sublime degree of Master Mason, I had our steward switch the altar Bible, from which we use in our lodge for the brothers to take their obligation on, to his grandfather's funeral Bible. And I invited as many of the living past masters from his rural lodge, Flat Gap 616, to be in the audience as I could. And there was not a dry eye in that house when I explained to him where that Bible had come from. I was emotional. He was emotional. That young man will remember that, in my opinion, for the rest of his life as a Mason. And I think I was blessed to have my ritual conferred by a person who was compassionate about it, and it really did soak in. I think the stories that Worshipful Brother Rich and Worshipful Brother Cameron just commends them in the fact that they might not have had that blessing, but yet it drove them as being the investigative individuals and questioning individuals they are, to making sure that under their watch, a brother who was receiving the degrees would not receive the experience they did.
Yeah, I'd like to just add on to that, because you mentioned experience. And I think if we really try to dissect and spoke about nothing other than ritual, I think we probably could come up with more, such as, I mean, really it's the before the ritual, it's during the ritual, and it's after the ritual. And there's so much that actually takes place, and there's so many little details that we can easily forget. Preparation, use of lights, music, dress. People on the sidelines are actually participating in the ritual, even though they may not think they are, and making sure that they stay effective and obviously quiet and focused. I think it's really all about how do we increase and improve the experience that all of our candidates and brothers go through, so that way they look back and say, wow, that was an amazing feeling that I had experienced. So I think there's a lot that really goes into it, and we all share a role in that. Worship Brother Gerald Smith, did you have a point that you'd like to add on to that?
Well, of course, you just mentioned the point that I wanted to make,
Oh, my apologies.
and I think it is a very important one. So important that having it repeated is worth the time. And that's the part about purge from your lodge the very concept of sideliners. Nobody's on the sideline. Everybody in that room is a participant in that degree. And the solemnity, the degree of spiritual energy within the room is greatly affected to the degree that everybody is paying attention to that. Nobody's chatting, nobody's looking at their cell phone or any of that kind of stuff. But that's just the baseline. They need to really be involved in the way that we've all been describing, and that's what makes the ideal environment in which to have the degree, and that can never be too overemphasized. That we should always be bringing up to our brothers in advance of the degrees that point. You're not just sitting on the sideline, you're part of it.
Mhm. To me, hearing you say that and hearing everybody else speak, it reminds me of what Worship Brother Bizak said one time and gave a presentation on the egregore in a lodge. So perhaps Worship Brother Bizak, you can just touch on that briefly in regards to the ritual work and the feeling and the experience we're shooting for.
Certainly, I think Gerald hit on egregore quite well, actually. I would like to speak to the Cameron's comments and Gerald's again on the repetitiveness and the transformation. And I think part of the personal experience of even meetings like tonight, brothers and friends, is that we can communicate on a personal level, maybe even better than we can inside a lodge sometimes. But I think if we ask ourselves, in our hearts, have we gone through ritual, watched ritual, conferred degrees, and feel like we have transformed? Do we feel like we've become better because of the sense we have that we're starting to expand our ideas about what all this really means and how it fits into our lives? I think that transformation begins when we find ourselves being a practicing Mason, not just a participant. And gosh knows we've got a lot of participants. And I agree with Jerry, being in the lodge makes you a participant. But being in the lodge regularly, being in the lodge not as a spectator, but as a true participant in your lodge, which means being engaged, which means being involved, which means coming to lodge, which means being around other like-minded men. That kind of a transformation is sparked by ritual. And certainly, Brian, what you said about when you see something that's really performed well, something there, as Rich says, creates that fire. You want to see it again. You want to be experienced in it. You want to experience it yourself. And you might even want to be a part of it. You can't do it if you don't come to lodge. And you really can't be involved in your lodge unless you are a participant, not just a spectator. And we know there's many spectators. So I think part of the question we ask ourselves is, are we doing this as a part-time labor? Are we committed to it? Is this in our hearts? Do we feel like we're better because we are associating with men we think are maybe feeling like they're better too? Not that they weren't good before, but that sense that just being in the midst of something that is profound, something that you're constantly assessing, and being aware that you kind of want to live up to the principles of this. You kind of want to be a part of it. And you're not really a part of it unless you engage. And I'll say that again, you have to be a participant and not merely a spectator in Freemasonry. And I believe when you do that, I believe that transformation, the repetitiveness of watching the degrees, conferring them, kind of leads back to that night we were all confused and wondering what was going on, like Chris says, trying to get to that level of understanding. And of course, if you've traveled, and I know many people in this room have, and I've been fortunate to travel a lot, and I've seen some real stinking degrees, some that were embarrassing, and I've seen some that were inspiring and magnificent. And those inspiring ones inspired me just as much as the bad ones that Cameron refers to inspired him. just to continue to try to make that experience generate in that candidate what I think is the perfect ritual. And that's doing it with passion and then following it up with a lot of instruction to explain what they've been through.
Thank you, Worship Brother. Brothers and friends, are there any other comments or questions or anything at all before we proceed? Yes, Jeff, I can see you on like this. Go ahead.
I don't know how to raise my hand on this thing here. I don't know what button to push, but
No problem.
you guys are talking about perfect ritual and stuff, and how some of them were you have been through some bad experience. Well, I think when I was raised to a Master Mason, I got a perfect ritual. I'm in the same lodge as John Cameron, and I wasn't raised in my lodge. There's a connection between Nashua, New Hampshire, and John Albro here in Nova Scotia, Canada. And for my Master Mason's degree ritual, our lodge went down there. We brought our people, our stuff, set up in New Hampshire in their lodge, and our people provided the ritual. Now, when you go to a different lodge, I think everyone that was participating, John Cameron participated in that. Everyone that participated would have to come to the top level because you're going to a different lodge. So as a potential of getting the best quality ritual, I think I had it because all of my brothers were trying their very best because it was a display in front of the brothers in Nashua. And I think where, Brother Poe there was saying, where he got a bad one and that drove him on. Since coming back and I try to participate as much as I can in the lodge. I mean, with the lockdowns and the COVID and stuff like this, our lodge is still closed, but anytime that I can, I think that great ritual kind of made me want to participate more and be more active in that in our lodge. I don't think just bad experiences produces the power to push yourself forward. I think I'm being led by an example that my lodge put together and the great atmosphere and the great facility that New Hampshire put together that I got the benefit of. So I think, it's just not bad ritual that drives you on. I got phenomenal ritual as far as I'm concerned. I've only been a Master Mason for 2 years. And since that time, I've only seen the degree about 2 more times, which, so I'm not going to say I'm an expert and have seen it for years and see no bad ritual when I see it. But I know I saw really good stuff and I got that, and that drives me on. And that I think, our lodge being out of our element and having to perform to its highest level, as far as I can see. I mean, it was just really phenomenal the way it was done. Everyone in dress, everyone in the right spot, everyone moving. As a participant, I was unaware of what was happening at the time, in the sense that, I'd never seen a Master's Mason degree. I was in shock because I was going through it. It's anyone that sits there and says, "Oh, I remember every little bit of it," I think is crazy, because it happens to you. And then at the end of it, you kind of wake up and say, what happened? You have to think back, and you can only remember 30 or 40% of it. I was lucky because I went through with 3 people and I was second, I believe, and got to see it one more time. But I just say that perhaps some of these lodges that need some help. Maybe they should be going to a different lodge and actually performing for the other lodge, that type of ritual to kind of wake up the whole thing. Because I think it really brought the caliber of what I got to a phenomenal level. It was just, like the whole thing of going to a different country, and having it done was just top quality. So I'll let you guys continue on there.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Wonderful.
Thank you, brother. Yes.
May I jump in? I'd like to point out that my degrees were performed by a different lodge than the one I belong to. So it's not always the case.
There's been some great comments. Thank you, Brother Poe. There's some great comments that have come in from people. I just want to thank you all very much for your comments and support. Some really great comments here. Before we move to taking this to an end, I would like to call on a few of our Rubicon brothers who I know have some extremely wise comments, Brother Kimball, about the Master Mason degree, as well as a few others. So, Worship Brother Kimball, you called on me last time. It's your turn. Give us some of your wisdom, please.
My compliments to the presenting team tonight. It's a fine presentation. Of course, the discussion is always excellent. I'm going to contribute perhaps one more misconception to the Master Mason degree, and that is the misconception that it's the finish line. And in fact, it's not a finish, it's actually the starting line. And I think many times we bring people in through the Master Mason degree and create the impression that everything's finished, that we're done at this point. And in fact, it's time for the work to begin. So that's my contribution for this evening, and I appreciate the opportunity to express that, Brother Brian.
Thank you, Worship Brother. Worship Brother Martin, any comments you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll add a couple. Worship Brother Brian. Going back to, I think, very early on when Worship Brother John asked about being a participant, whether it is at the level of initiation or candidate at Fellowcraft or Master Mason, and observing it and then conferring the degrees. I get what I refer to as Masonic nuggets out of every encounter and experience that I have, whether it's in a lodge or here tonight with the group and the conversation that we've had. And take notes. I jot down notes. And I can't wait to go back and watch the replay of this on what I missed while I was jotting down my note. And I say that because the candidates, as they participate during the conferring of the degree, are inundated with so much data that they typically will focus on, and I speak primarily from my personal experience on this, you focus on an area and you miss what came right after it. And you don't see it or realize it or identify it until afterwards, whether you watch it again or you prepare to confer the degree. I learn something every day, or realize or change my perspective about an element of the entered apprentice degree that I did not glean or did not comprehend or did not identify during the time that I was going through the degree, when I was learning the proficiency, as I learned the meaning surrounding the degree. And this is true as also with the Fellowcraft as it is with the Master Mason degree, primarily because I've gained more knowledge and insight into what those aspects of the degree, those aspects of the teaching of the degree are. And tonight is no different. I've got a whole page of my Masonic nuggets that I jotted down as the presenters were presenting. Outstanding presentation. Congratulations on that. And more specifically also is the conversation that we've had from the members that are here tonight. And again, I can't wait to go back and rewatch it. And I'll probably watch it several times because I'll be taking a note and I'll have to rewind it and go back because I missed something. But I would say that individuals that are going through the degree are just, they can only receive so much and they won't get it all up front. But the conversation and the comments about the quality of the degree, I think, have a lot of merit and will in a lot of regards, inspire somebody to want to continue forward with that fire that was discussed tonight. And in some cases, as we very well know, it'd take a flamethrower to get the fire going for individuals that we have in some of our lodges. So, but I've enjoyed the presentation tonight. And again, can't wait to go back and watch it again so I can get more of the Masonic nuggets that are enriched in this conversation tonight.
Thank you very much, Worship Brother, for your comments. Worship Brother Lyle, you're one of the premier ritualists in my mind, thinking back on all the ritual that I've seen, and I'd love to get your input before the night is over, if you don't mind.
Well, there's been so much said tonight. Like Alan said, you could fill pages with the nuggets. You know, I got to reiterate, I think, what Brother Dan Kemble has said, that the Master Mason degree is a starting line, and the 2 degrees prior to that are preparations for that. You can see many different people and lodges put on these degrees, and you will always get something new out of them. I think of it like getting to know a great piece of music, like Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. If you don't know that piece, you need to find out about it and listen to it and get to know it. It's worth the time and effort. But as you listen to serious music like that, every conductor is going to bring out something different in its performance. They're going to find out just by listening to how a conductor portrays what's written on the page, you will find new connections, new tonalities, new melodies, new chords that come out of this brilliant rhythm that it just takes this massive amount of people to put on all at one time. So there's all those things come into play, and the audience, if they're doing their job and being good listeners, they participate in a way too. They take away something new every time that they see it. So you are really, in a certain respect, never really done with the Master Mason degree, or any of the degrees for that matter. It takes. I had Cameron Poe's experience with it. In fact, we were raised at the same raising. So we both had kind of negative experiences on our 3rd degree, and I think it drove us both to kind of get to where we are a little bit, but also to strive and make it as much an experience for the new guys coming through, because everyone in the lodge is a participant, and that person being raised and coming to a new understanding of themselves and the world. You really could go on and on with this. I don't need to ramble anymore, but just to encourage people to engage it and re-engage it, and never decide that you are finished. As soon as you decide you are finished, you set up a wall and you can't go any further. That's the same reason we don't discuss politics and religion. Those are barriers and walls that people set up to their understanding. I think it was said by one of the presenters somewhere back in there that they as they journeyed through the degrees, they began to see God everywhere, God in all things. Mm-hmm. And that's really ultimately what we're aspiring to do. We see it in the creation, the material world. We see it in each other. We see it in ourselves. And we are the foundation of the great lodge that we're trying to build as Freemasons. And I think maybe I'll end with that.
Great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Worship Brother Barry Easton with Rubicon as well. I'd like to offer you the floor as well, if you'd like.
Thank you. First, I'd like to, Chris, Rich, and Eddie, outstanding. Very well put together. You guys definitely know your stuff and did a very good job. You guys pointed out some things, that I'm sure all of us on here know, the Master Mason degree is probably the latest addition to Freemasonry as an organization. and it may be a new degree for the craft, relatively speaking, but it contains some very, very, very old principles. And you all also pointed out, you know, there are no accidents. These things happen when they're supposed to happen. If you believe in my opinion, if you believe in providence or God or, you know, something greater than yourself at all, you have to believe these things. So I think this did happen when it was needed, and that this starting point, this initiation does mean to begin, contains the echoes of that spirituality that's been ingrained with us as a species, you know, from time immemorial. And I think that's why it holds so much weight. And the story that we tell in Freemasonry has been told in 1,000 cultures over millennia, spread over many continents over a very, very long time. It is it's permanently engraved on the heart of the man. And we are one of the last custodians of that tradition. And I think that's what we are. We need to treat this thing with the reverence that it deserves. And I don't want to go on and on. But I'll just say thank you for letting me be a part of this and witness what happened here tonight. This was very enlightening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Worship Brother. If there are any other final comments, you're welcome to bring those up at this time. Otherwise, we will proceed to closing. Very good. Worshipful Brother Lau Van Outer, would you please be so kind as to deliver our closing devotion?
Let us pray, brothers. Great architect of the universe, we offer thanks for the opportunity to meet in the face of our adversities. Be with, nurture, and have mercy on all those who are sick and distressed in their lives. May all our efforts bring your peace and beauty, that we may manifest the primal will to good, which eternally creates and sustains the universe. Amen.
So must be.
So it be.
Brothers and friends, our next meeting is in 2 weeks, November 23rd at 7 p.m. And in this meeting, it will be one that you also do not want to miss. We will be diving very deep into the legend of Hiram Abiff. I encourage you to mark your calendar and join us for that evening as well. If you are already on our RSVP list, you do not need to RSVP again. However, if you would like to invite someone to our meetings, please ask them to visit RubiconMasonicSociety.com/RSVP. Brothers, I want to thank you again for your time this evening. It's always a pleasure to be in the company of men that are like-minded, that are faithful in the fraternity, faithful and committed to each other, that embrace the differences, that seek transformation, that pursue wisdom, that enjoy the knowledge that we bring, and as Worshipful Brother Rich Hansen said, enjoys finding God in everything. Brothers, I want to thank you so much for your time. You have a great and safe evening. We'll see you next meeting.